Chapter 12. Joseph Smith Sr. loses his property and becomes poor. Receives a visit from Jason Mack. The history of the latter concluded. My husband, as before stated, followed merchandising for a short period in the town of Randolph. Soon after he commenced business in this place, he ascertained that crystallized ginseng root sold very high in China, being used as a remedy for the plague, which was then raging there. He therefore concluded to embark in a traffic of this article, and consequently made an investment of all the means which he commanded, in that way and manner which was necessary to carry on a business of this kind, viz., crystallizing and exporting the root. When he had obtained a quantity of the same, a merchant by the name of Stevens of Royalton offered him $3,000 for what he had. But my husband refused his offer, as it was only about 2/3 of its real value, and told the gentleman that he would rather venture shipping it himself. My husband in a short time went to the city of New York with the view of shipping his ginseng, and finding a vessel in port which was soon to set sail, he made arrangements with the captain to this effect, that he was to sell the ginseng in China and return the avails thereof to my husband, and this the captain bound himself to do in a written obligation. Mr. Stevens, hearing that Mr. Smith was making arrangements to ship his ginseng, repaired immediately to New York, and by taking some pains he ascertained the vessel on board of which Mr. Smith had shipped his ginseng. And having some of the same article on hand himself, he made arrangements with the captain to take his also, and he was to send his son on board the vessel to take charge of it. It appears from circumstances that afterwards transpired that the ginseng was taken to China and sold there to good advantage or at a high price, but not to much advantage to us, for we never received anything except a small chest of tea of the avails arising from this adventure. When the vessel returned, Stevens, the younger, also returned with it, and when my husband became apprised of his arrival, he went immediately to him and made inquiry respecting the success of the captain in selling his ginseng. Mr. Stevens told him quite a plausible tale, the particulars of which I have forgotten, but the amount of it was that the sale had been a perfect failure, and the only thing which had been brought for Mr. Smith from China was a small chest of tea, which chest had been delivered into his care for my husband. In a short time after this, young Stevens hired a house of Major Mack, and employed 8 or 10 hands, and commenced the business of crystallizing ginseng. Soon after engaging in this business, when he had got fairly at work, my brother, Major Mack, went to see him, and, as it happened, he found him considerably intoxicated. When my brother came into his presence, he spoke to him thus: "Well, Mr. Stevens, you are doing a fine business. You will soon be ready for another trip to China." Then observed again, in a quite indifferent manner, "Oh, Mr. Stevens, how much did Brother Smith's adventure bring?" Being under the influence of liquor, he was not on his guard, and took my brother by the hand and led him to a trunk. Then opening it, he observed, "There, sir, are the proceeds of Mr. Smith's ginseng," exhibiting a large amount of silver and gold. My brother was much astonished at this. However, he disguised his feelings, and conversed with him a short time upon different subjects, then returned home, and about 10 o'clock the same night he started for Randolph to see my husband. When Mr. Stevens had overcome his intoxication, he began to reflect upon what he had done, and making some inquiry concerning my brother, he ascertained that he had gone to Randolph. Mr. Stevens, conjecturing his business, that he had gone to see my husband respecting the ginseng adventure, went immediately to his establishment, dismissed his hands, called his carriage, and fled with his cash for Canada, and I have never heard anything concerning him since. My husband pursued him a while, but finding pursuit vain, returned home much dispirited at the state of his affairs. He then went to work to overhaul his accounts, in order to see how he stood with the world, upon which he discovered that, In addition to the loss sustained by the China adventure, he had lost about $2,000 in bad debts. At the time he sent his venture to China, he was owing $1,800 in the city of Boston for store goods, and he expected to discharge the debt at the return of the China expedition. But having invested almost all his means in ginseng, the loss which he suffered in this article rendered it impossible for him to pay his debt with the property which remained in his hands. The principal dependence left him in the shape of property was the farm at Tunbridge, upon which we were then living, having moved back to this place immediately after his venture was sent to China. This farm, which was worth about $1,500, my husband sold for $800 in order to make a speedy payment on the Boston debt, and as I had not used the check of $1,000, which my brother and Mr. Mudgett gave me, I added it to the $800 obtained for the farm, and by this means the whole debt was liquidated. While we were living on the Tunbridge farm, my brother Jason made us a visit. He brought with him a young man by the name of William Smith, a friendless orphan, whom he had adopted as his own son, and previous to this time had kept constantly with him. But he now thought best to leave him with us for the purpose of having him go to school. He remained with us, however, only 6 months before my brother came again and took him to New Brunswick, which they afterwards made their home, and where my brother had gathered together some 30 families on a tract of land which he had purchased for the purpose of assisting poor persons to the means of sustaining themselves. He planned their work for them, and when they raised anything which they wished to sell, he took it to market for them. Owning a schooner himself, he took their produce to Liverpool, as it was then the best market. When Jason set out on the above-mentioned visit to Tunbridge, he purchased a quantity of goods which he intended as presents for his friends, especially his mother and sisters. But on his way thither he found so many objects of charity that he gave away not only the goods, but most of his money. On one occasion he saw a woman who had just lost her husband and who was very destitute. He gave her $15 in money and a full suit of clothes for herself and each of her children, which were 6 in number. This was the last interview I ever had with my brother Jason, but 20 years later he wrote the following letter to my brother Solomon, and that is about all the intelligence I have ever received from him since I saw him. South Branch of Ormukto, Province of New Brunswick, June 30th, 1835. My dear brother Solomon, you will, no doubt, be surprised to hear that I am still alive, although in an absence of 20 years I have never written to you before. But I trust you will forgive me when I tell you that, for most of the 20 years, I have been so situated that I've had little or no communication with the lines, and have been holding meetings day and night from place to place. Besides, my mind has been so taken up with the deplorable situation of the earth, the darkness in which it lies, that when my labors did call me near the lines, I did not realize the opportunity which presented itself of letting you know where I was. And, again, I have designed visiting you long since, and annually have promised myself that the succeeding year I would certainly seek out my relatives, and enjoy the privilege of one pleasing interview with them before I passed into the valley and shadow of death. But last, though not least, let me not startle you when I say that according to my early adopted principles of the power of faith, the Lord has in his exceeding kindness bestowed upon me the gift of healing by the prayer of faith, and the use of such simple means as seem congenial to the human system. But my chief reliance is upon him who organized us at the first, and can restore at pleasure that which is disorganized. The first of my peculiar successes in this way was 12 years since, and from nearly that date I have had little rest. In addition to the incessant calls which I in a short time had, there was the most overwhelming torrent of opposition poured down upon me that I ever witnessed. But it pleased God to take the weak to confound the wisdom of the wise. I have in the last 12 years seen the greatest manifestations of the power of God in healing the sick, that, with all my sanguinity, I ever hoped or imagined. And when the learned infidel has declared with sober face, time and again, that disease had obtained such an ascendancy that death could be resisted no longer, that the victim must wither beneath his potent arm, I have seen the almost lifeless clay slowly but surely resuscitated and revive, till the pallid monster fled so far that the patient was left in the full bloom of vigorous health. But it is God that hath done it, and to him let all the praise be given. I am now compelled to close this epistle, for I must start immediately on a journey of more than 100 miles to attend a heavy case of sickness. So God be with you all. Farewell, Jason Mack. The next intelligence we received concerning Jason after his letter to Brother Solomon was that he, his wife, and oldest son were dead. And this concludes my account of my brother Jason.